For me, having the podcasting platform was so valuable because I was able to meet with people who had written books about their heroin addiction, knowing what they went through in active addiction and seeing the people that they came out on the other side to be floored me. I couldn't believe that this was possible. So they say ignorance is bliss, but I don't think that's true. I think education really, really sheds light on the path that you need to follow to find where you need to be.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a surprise outbreak.
We only have so many
the issue of pandemic.
No social distancing at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the mask? Where's the gloves?
One expert says a second
get away from all of these
We all
people.
need some good news.
A message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. For this episode, I'll be turning the table by interviewing the interviewer. I first met my next guest when the editor and publisher of the Women Who Podcast magazine, Kathy Barron, asked if I'd like to be interviewed for the 2023 fall issue. And given I love all things podcasting, I, of course, said yes. Thus began a new friendship and relationship with writer, copywriter, editor, content creator, and fellow podcaster Chelsea Pegues. Chelsea has a professional writing degree in communications from Southern New Hampshire University, graduated Summa Cum Laude, and is a member of the Sigma Tau Delta English Honor Society. For 14 years, she served as a senior administrative professional at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and continues to have a passion for learning, communication, media, and creating content across multiple platforms. Her desire is to apply her creativity and skills to projects that make a positive impact in the world. We'll be chatting about how her original podcast, the Sticky Eddie podcast, with her co-host Suzanne Michelle, and their current one, Let's Try This Again, Random Chats About the Chaos of Life, is doing just that. So let's meet Miss Smarty Pants by welcoming Chelsea Pegues to 19 Stories.
Oh my God. Cheryl, I don't even know what to say. I'm blushing. I'm going to have to steal Kathy's idea, and you are going to have to send me a copy of that recording so I can play it for myself every morning.
For a fee, I'll do anything. Well, Miss Chelsea, how are you today?
Thank you so much. That was such a gorgeous introduction and just flawless. I feel very special.
Well, you are gorgeous and flawless. My God. Seriously, folks, if you could see this woman's skin, we're not on video right now, but go look her up. She's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. I've been looking forward to this so much so that the second I saw that you were available, I hopped right on so we could dig right in. I'm so honored and thrilled to be your guest today. Could not be more excited to be here with you.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and likewise, because I'm so delighted to have you here, as our connection is a true testament to the power of podcasting. And of course, the fantastic forum that Kathy Barron has created with her Women Who Podcast magazine. So before we dive in, Chelsea, I'd like to take a moment and say that I've listened to both of your podcasts, some of your musings, and read several of your articles, and how much I love how you can turn a simple description or phrase into such poetry is a really beautiful thing. And you definitely have a gift, and it's no wonder you're Latin all over the place with your Delta, Sigma, Summa, et cetera, et cetera.
That's my branch, Delta Sigma Summa.
Yeah, I just
Zumba.
made that up. Feel free to use
salsa con salsa.
But in all seriousness, I understand that Pig-geese is a Latin name. So please tell us where you're originally from and where you reside now.
Oh my goodness. So actually, Pig-geese is my husband's name. My maiden name is actually German. My maiden name is Cruci.
Okay.
Yeah, which is interesting. My mother is from Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico. So I'm half Latina. I don't speak Spanish fluently, so don't even, we won't even try.
No habla español. Okay.
No, un poquito. Spanglish is what I
Spanglish.
speak.
Okay.
Yes. But I've always felt in touch with my Latin roots more so than anything, just because of the way my mom raised me. My dad's family is German, British, Irish, and Native American. Go figure. So I'm kind of a mixture of everything. And I grew up in a town in northern Westchester that's in the Hudson Valley region of New York. So about an hour and a half or so up from New York City. I'm not really a city person. I'm a country mouse. And so I'm still in that area. I don't see us really leaving New York because my husband is such a diehard New Yorker. But I love it here. I'm a big nature girl. I'm anything that brings me outside and up into the mountains is my cup of tea. And you'll find me there always.
It's interesting because I have a fellow podcaster that I've met through both, podcasting and VO. She lives outside of Westchester County. And I think everyone I know on the East Coast is either in Manhattan or in Westchester County. So
it feels that way.
It does. And, I lived in both New Jersey and New York, Manhattan for a summer. And I never got to Westchester County, but I have driven upstate New York, and it is gorgeous. It really, for folks who only see pictures of Manhattan or only think of New Jersey as
Don't
Newark.
Think of New Jersey. Just,
be
no
nice.
Offense.
Play nice.
I have family
Play
there.
Nice. Hey, it's called the Garden State for a reason. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I've yet to find that. No, I'm just kidding. No,
moving right along.
Jersey has gorgeous beaches. I have family there. It's definitely worth a visit, but there's nothing like the Hudson Valley region of New York. I love the portion of the valley where I am because it's conducive to so many areas of New York. It would only take me about 3.5 hours to get to the Finger Lakes region, which is gorgeous. They have such amazing waterfalls and rock formations and sights to see. I'm not too far from a lot of very artistic river towns, as we call them, towns like Peekskill and Ossining that are right on the water, and Beacon, which hosts a plethora of artists and venues. So it's amazing. I highly recommend anyone who's curious, please come check it out. Do yourself a favor. You'll never forget it. We have amazing views, and for the most part, people are very friendly. So yeah, come visit us. Pick some apples, see some leaves, drink some coffee. Don't drink tea.
Like you are right now.
I know.
Says
I'm
the one
sick.
that's teetotaling right now. You just gave a beautiful, picturesque audio endorsement of where you live. And trust me, when I come back on the East Coast for a visit, I am going to find you.
Oh, you have an open invitation, my dear.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So let's dive in and talk about your original podcast, the Sticky Eddie podcast, that you launched in April of 2021, and it lasted until September 5th, 2022, for a total of 65 episodes. But before we do, I'd like to mention that there may be some triggers for those who've dealt with addiction, as you openly share about addiction and how it has profoundly affected you and your family.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a precise fact. I didn't know that the podcast had run for that extent.
I do my homework.
You surely do. I am very, very proud of the Sticky Eddie podcast. It's spelled a little differently. Sticky is spelled with 2 I's. And that is because my late father, Eddie, was a professional drummer and his stage name was Sticky. So the 2 I's are meant to represent the 2 drumsticks. And he was an alcoholic most of his life. I think the first time he took a drink, he was probably around 9. He was born in 1951. So this was, the late 50s, early 60s. And It's no secret in our family. I come from a long line of alcoholics. Things and cultures and times were very, very different at the turn of the century and into the early 20th century. And especially being a musician, it wasn't unnatural for someone who's constantly with a band and in bars and, playing
Yeah.
rock and blues to be indulging in alcohol. But he favored it a little too much. My problem is that my dad was my best friend. He was my entire world. I don't really have a relationship with my mom. She's in my life. She is still alive, but my closest relationship for my formative years was absolutely with my father. And he taught me everything I know about music, about nature, about vintage cars, about movies and Paul Newman. I mean, where would we be without Paul Newman?
He taught you really? That's
my big takeaway was Paul Newman.
Paul Newman. Okay.
But we had the type of relationship where we were just best friends. We could talk on the phone for hours and hours. And, I would go photograph his band when they were out playing because I fancied myself an amateur photographer in my 20s.
Which you are, by the way. Some of your photographs on Instagram are just because I'm a little amateur shutterbug myself, but they're beautiful. So
thank you.
Yeah, carry on.
So unfortunately, as he got older, his addiction just worsened and he would have very long spells of being dry. And then, he would fall back again into old habits. And it just became a merry-go-round of stress and strife. My son and my husband, of course, were also very attached to him because his personality was magnetic. I mean, Cheryl, talk about Paul Newman. You wanted to meet somebody dashing and funny and just ultra charismatic. That was my dad. Everyone who met him loved him. And he just had such a zest and a passion for life. And it got to a point where his pancreas and his liver started suffering so much from the alcohol abuse. And his doctors in 2018, I want to say, he had suffered a small stroke. And his doctors flat out told him, like, if you continue this, you are going to die. Your organs are going to give in. He did really well for quite a while. And
meaning, if you don't mind me asking, did he abstain from drinking?
He did because he was in such dire straits. And actually, the small stroke caused him to lose vocal ability for a few weeks, which was terrifying because we didn't know if it was going to be permanent or not. I mean, my father's voice was such a huge thing for me. It's your parent, it's your friend. Can you imagine never hearing your person's voice ever again? I mean, it was just so terrifying. Fortunately, he did regain vocal ability and we moved past it. And he was able to see my son grow up a little bit more. As we all know, 2020 came about, that wonderful year.
Yeah.
And I saw him for my birthday, which is November 12th. And I had the day off from work. And because it fell on a weekday that year, it was just kind of me and him hanging out because everybody else was, working and busy. My son was in school. And we had a beautiful day together. It was just so easy and memorable. And we just had a really fun time, kind of doing nothing, just wandering around town. And then a month later, regulations started to hit us a little harder. And it was suggested counts were so high, especially for people with comorbidities such as my parents, it would be especially dangerous to have Thanksgiving gatherings all together.
Yeah, I mean, New York,
it was
state as a whole just got hit so hard.
Exactly. And actually, my husband's hometown of New Rochelle was ground zero here, I believe.
Really?
In New
I
York
thought it was
State,
Manhattan. Yeah. Okay.
No, it was New Rochelle. And then, because that town is so conducive to the boroughs, I think patient zero worked in the city, and that's how it spread. But in any event, people were dying. There were no vaccines yet. It was November 2020. Nobody knew what was going on. And so we made the call and we said, listen, we just don't feel like it's safe to see each other for Thanksgiving. I didn't want to invite my parents and then not have my husband's family. So we just decided to keep everybody out and celebrate by ourselves. And I think my dad understood, but I know that it broke his heart. He's a very social animal and he doesn't do well by himself. My parents are divorced, so he was living on his own. And so the depression sank in harder and harder. And I think the realization that before this got any better, it was going to get way, way worse. And when would he be able to see us all again? You know, we're heading into winter, so outside activities are going to be limited. And it was just a very scary time. And so late November, early December, I began to realize that he was drinking heavily again. If you're a child of addiction listening, or anyone who is close to someone who suffers, you know that you develop such a fine-tuned skill to suss out when your person is using their substance of choice.
Oh, yes. And
Yes.
if I may share with you, because I don't think you
Absolutely.
know this, Chelsea, I am also a child of an alcoholic.
Oh, I did not know.
Excuse me. Yeah, I'm sharing this on this episode with you because of what we're talking about and how in listening to your podcast and listening to your story, how many things that you mentioned that I related. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I
No,
wanted
not
to
at
just
all.
let you know that so that there's a, there's a connection that I have with
I'm
you that kind of goes
honored.
beyond just the time that we've chatted and had fun and gotten to know each other. My heart goes out to you in what you're about to share. So,
And likewise, because it's always, and I thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that. I just got Southern for a second. I was like, thanks, Cheryl.
that's okay. We'll take a tour around the country. Get Southern,
A
Northern,
spirit took me
East,
over.
whatever.
The solidarity is always appreciated because you do feel like sometimes as a child and you're going through these things, you do feel like you're all alone. You're the only one. So the later it got into November and the early December, I started, he would pick up the phone and I could just, from the first hello, I could hear the inebriation and it just became so frustrating. And I just felt like, when am I getting off this merry-go-round? Like, enough is enough, man. Please pull it together. You have a family who loves you and we want to see you live. Now I'll stop myself here. You must understand, I had little to no other experience with addiction. I myself, thankfully, don't suffer in that way with a substance abuse issue. I had no tools, Cheryl. I didn't have a toolkit. I didn't know what harm reduction was. I didn't understand that children of alcoholics could also attend AA meetings for information.
Mm-hmm.
I had no resources. I had no contacts. I had no one to reach out to. I didn't know where to turn. I guess in my frustration, I don't know why, because I love to Google, it just didn't dawn on me to gather anything. I don't know why. That still perplexes me about myself to this day. But I would always use ultimatums and threats and pressure. And anybody who's dealt with this knows that's the exact opposite of what will work and really what you should do. Because as hard as it is in becoming an advocate, I have realized that compassion, as opposed to making someone feel other, will win every time.
Yeah.
And had I just met my father with more compassion and more questions and a more open attitude of trying to gain a better scope of what he was going through, I don't know if it would have ultimately ended the same way, but I do know that at least I would have had the opportunity to better express to him that he wasn't the problem and that I was so very, very proud of him. And that's the reason I was so angry, because I wanted him to be here forever.
If I may say,
Of
Chelsea,
course.
and I'm sure you'll share more about what the Sticky Eddie podcast is, but I would certainly hope you've cut yourself grace, because when we're in the thick of dealing with what's right in front of us, and especially someone really close, your dad, we don't always think of all the options. That's why staying in community, that's why this podcast started out from fear to hope, because we were in the midst of the pandemic where people were isolated and scared out of their gourds. And so you were in the midst of the pandemic, your dad was, your family was, and dealing with an addiction issue, which, as we know, in hindsight, the uptick in alcoholism and substance abuse during the pandemic has just decimated families and people's lives. So when you're dealing with chaos, which is part of your new podcast, it's hard to think outside the box and go, oh, maybe if I just Google this or I look for the answers this way. I want to encourage you to please stay on the side of grace for yourself.
Thank you. I have to tell you, it's a hard one lesson. It's something that is not earned easily. I have come a long way in the last 3 years. I'm doing much better with cutting myself some slack than I was in 2020 and 2021. That's for sure. 2 days before Christmas, I got a call from my mom. No one in my father's building had seen him for a couple of days. And people were getting a little concerned because my dad loved being outside. Of course, he took it upon himself to plant a flower garden on the property where he was living. He was just always out and about. People would see him quite often. So when no one saw him and his neighbors were aware of the problem as well, I was very frustrated and I was a little dismissive at first. And I said, all right, well, I'll call the local police and I'll have them do a wellness check. And I'm thinking they're going to knock on his door and he's going to be so embarrassed, it'll knock him out of whatever he's doing. And hopefully he'll see that this is just bananas. It's 2 days before Christmas, for Pete's sake. Like, this is not what we need to be doing. And that morning, before any of this had transpired, I had gone for an early morning run. It was December, so it was about 7:30-ish when the sun came up. And my dad's favorite color was pink. And the sky that morning was, Cheryl, I'm sure that you've seen some divine sunsets on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
This was like the sky was on fire. It just like called my name and made me stop dead in my track. And I stopped there and I just stared for what felt like forever. I could not take my eyes off the pink in the sky. And so then later that afternoon, when I got the call from my mom, for some reason, I started thinking about the sky again. And when I didn't hear back from the police right away, I just kind of knew, even before I hit the road, what was happening. And I decided, all right, well, if they're not calling me back, then maybe it's worse than I thought. And I jumped in my car. I have a lead foot, so I was already doing way too fast down the Taconic, trying to get to my hometown when my husband called me. And I guess somebody from the building had gotten in touch with him after I left the house. And, he said, I'm so sorry. And that's all he had to say. And I don't remember the rest of the drive. I just blacked out. And I got to my dad's apartment and he was gone. At 69 years old, he was gone from alcohol use disorder, and I never got to say goodbye. My last words to him were, I love you, but it was a very flippant, like, yeah, all right, Dad, I love you. I'll talk to you later. Not anything like our normal relationship. The anger had just taken over. And fast forward, a few months and after wrapping up his final affairs. And one thing I will say, just a little bit of a side adventure for a second, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Side journey.
Absolutely.
Especially in the wake of everything that we've dealt with over the past 3 years from COVID, I have to reiterate, young, old, if you are no longer in your teenage years and you're in your early 20s, this is for you. Everyone should have a will and an end of life plan. Like ASAP, as morbid and weird as it sounds, it is so helpful because literally anything can happen to you at any time.
At any time. And it's not morbid at all. You are speaking at absolute common sense.
Oh my God. It's such a gift. I could not. So as I mentioned, my dad was a musician and I was cleaning out his apartment by myself because, again, it's not really my mom's job. They were not together. So I'm cleaning the apartment and I opened this cabinet that I thought was full of CDs. And it was full of bins of paperwork and files in date order, labeled, neatly stacked. Everything was perfect, ready to go. I was able to find his insurance information, his
That's
everything.
Incredible.
That is what made me just weep for days. I couldn't get over his level of organization and what all this time I spent judging him and berating him when I was mad at him and in the throes of his addiction. And underneath it all, he was always that person. He was always that kind, organized, thoughtful person. All of that to say that just because someone struggles with addiction to a substance, that's the substance. It is not
them.
who they are.
Yes.
Yeah. It is not indicative of someone's true character. because they are dependent on whatever their substance of choice is.
That is such a profound statement because we tend to think of, we've heard the term, or, maybe you haven't, the highly functioning alcoholic.
Yeah.
Because they can show up and do their job so well or organize their life so well. And yet you would think someone who has that grasp and control of their life would not be a substance abuser, which is ridiculous because, like you said, that it's the disease, it's not the person.
Right.
And so I appreciate you saying that about people getting their will together because, again, we don't know.
Right.
And perhaps you can chat for a moment about how that birthed the Sticky Yeti podcast, because your first episode you recorded was your pilot episode you recorded while you were sitting in your car.
I, to this day, still have not nailed the perfect sound booth area in my
No,
home.
I wasn't saying it for that, silly.
No. But
oh
it's
my
funny.
gosh.
No, I don't say it for you. I say it because Suzanne, my current co-host and partner, makes fun of me all the time because I'm obsessed with how I sound. For some reason, I feel like she always sounds great and I always sound like I'm on the moon.
That is not why I mentioned that. I mentioned it because people can always learn about sound and sound treatment and what have you.
Listen, the car was a great place. I was comfortable. It was soundproof. I don't think there was an echo. I haven't listened to it in a long time, so you'd have to tell me. But, it was a good start.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying is you just got started. You did it. Obviously, you felt like you had something to share. And so you sat in your car. And by the way, your sound is good today. It sounds really good.
Oh, thank you.
So how did that happen? Were you leaving his home at one point and you just said, I need to do an audio journal of this?
Oh my God, no.
No? Okay.
No, I was a hot mess. I was not functioning well. I spent the first year of my dad's passing in the bathtub listening to Terrible Thanks for Asking, the podcast hosted by Nora McInerney.
I'm not familiar with that. What is that?
Get familiar. It's amazing. You'll love it.
Okay.
And in any event, I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't doing anything, which is okay. I couldn't pull it together.
You were grieving. That's okay.
Yeah. It is. And it still is okay because as we all know, grief hits you in waves and it just depends.
Yes. I'm only laughing because there's been several times I've gone to order a latte and for no apparent reason.
Just start crying.
I just start crying and they're like, would you like a shot of something else? If that was tacky, forgive me.
No, I think that's really cute. And I think my dad would have laughed at that. In 2021, podcasting for some reason, well, not for some reason, for obvious reasons, podcasting really hit its stride during the pandemic because we were all home. Mm-hmm. And we were all suddenly finding our voices and things that we wanted to talk about and ways to connect with each other and how better to get on a soapbox and reach, a plethora of people than hopping on a Libsyn or Podbean and putting it out there. And so I kept thinking about it and I'm batting around the idea and I'm trying, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of Nora McInerney and her work. So I'm trying to make everything I do sound like it's worthy of NPR.
And I understand. That's what I want to. That's what I want to be and do when I grow up.
Right? Like I just wanted to be like the smooth host. No, but I really wanted to know if there were other children of addiction out there who felt like I felt. I wanted to feel less alone. I needed a community. I needed some place to rage and say, doesn't this suck? Why do we have to deal with this? Why can't our parents or our person or our people get it together enough so that we can have them? How selfish are they that they would leave us behind and choose this substance over us, having us, being with us, being here? I was so angry. And then I found, through a friend of mine, I found the Dopey podcast. I was connected with Dave, the host of the Dopey podcast, which is now a hugely successful podcast about addiction. And as I started listening to it, I started realizing like, wow, people are really struggling. There is so much more to the story. And then as family members started reaching out to me, I started realizing that there was more depth to what my dad was going through. He grew up in an era of Catholic school where it was okay to abuse children. And, not only was he physically abused, but I don't know if there was anything deeper. There was an instance where he ended up suffering permanent hearing damage when he was hit in the head from a priest. Yeah.
Oh, no.
So I don't know if there were other bricks in the foundation of his addiction that I just wasn't aware of. I got in touch with Dave and I floated my idea past him and I said, listen, I'm thinking of starting this podcast. I'm fresh in grief. I don't know what I'm doing. I barely know which way is up these days, but what tips and advice do you have? And he was just so kind and empathetic. And he was like, listen, just get a microphone and start talking. Start with your story and then try to grab as many people as you can and ask them what theirs are. And it was like the wrist to forehead, like the moment, like, I can just start doing this. It doesn't have
the
forehead slap. But I'm like, I could just start doing this. And then I'm thinking of a name and I'm like, well, it's for my dad. It's so that I can kind of get to know him better through the experience of others. So I'll just call it Sticky Eddie because he was in quite the sticky situation.
Yeah,
his name was Eddie.
It's the perfect name. And actually, I love the logo that you have.
Thank you.
Before I had even listened to it and realized who it was about, I looked at it because my husband's the drummer.
Oh,
cool. And
cool.
so I went, are those eyes drumstick? And then it turned out it was a bass drum that you had or a snare drum. So,
yeah, with the sun. That was my second logo, actually.
Very cool.
Revamp. Thank you. Thanks, Canva.
We
Not
love
sponsored.
Canva. No affiliation, but yeah, I think you and I we're Canva queens, her Canva fans.
So I just started. I wrote down what I wanted to say and I called my first episode The Pink Sky and the Broken Heart. And I got really emotional in my car for about an hour. And then by, the grace of anyone listening, people started agreeing to talk to me. And I got to meet, and this is the one thing that I just adore about this platform. I got to meet so many people that I'm still in touch with now, 2 years later, frequently, who I consider true friends. Authors, musicians, just all sorts of people from all walks of life who were both addicted themselves or children of addiction. And I'm just so damn grateful.
Yeah.
So grateful.
Yeah, me too. It sounds so corny, but it is a magical world. It really is the magical world of podcasting because pretty much everyone I have met, and they're schmoes in any walk of life, but
give them a microphone. You're going to be a star, kid.
They're going to be a schmo amplified. No, no, seriously. There's just most people are so willing to help and very gracious.
Yes.
And
yes.
What a time to share our stories. If there was ever a time, in fact, I have a question down the line. Gosh, so much more I want to get in, but I'm just affirming what you just shared that, it's a pretty special community of people.
I have not met anyone. And I'm going to go off for a second. I have to say, Canadian podcasters, I have like a whole tribe in Canada. I have to get up there one day to meet them all in person. Just some of the nicest people. I can't even believe that this nation of just do-gooders exists. It's insane.
My family's roots are in Canada. They're in
right. They're just so nice.
Winnipeg, Manitoba. Yeah, they are special. Yeah, I think so because they all need to huddle together in the winter. It's dang cold.
I guess.
Well, I could say it for my area because Winnipeg, it's known as Winterpeg. It's really cold.
Yes. I have a friend in Winnipeg actually, a podcasting friend.
I need you. I can't alienate you. I need to hug you.
I know. It's unreal how kind and generous people are. And in particular, I've had 2 or 3 podcast hosts who really, really, we all take this seriously, but you can tell that there is kind of there are podcasters and then there are like podcasters. Like, I'm in this to win this. This is going to be my life kind of thing.
Yeah.
And several of those kind of hosts have actually invited me to several workshops, how to do certain things, how to network, how to gain sponsors. People will really put their hand out. And even if your shows are aligned in like the same genre, let's say, it doesn't matter. There's no competition.
Right.
Seriously, it's so strange that you have to go into podcasting to see the good in the world.
Whatever it takes, my dear. It's whatever it takes, it's there.
Yeah. People will lay down, their coat over mud puddles for you. No joke. Like, they'll do anything. And I mean that metaphorically, of course. But, people will really do anything to help you and see you succeed.
See, it's that turn of the phrase that you have. I just imagine someone laying down their coat for you.
Oh, the Victorian spirit took me over for a second.
Okay.
First, it was the Southern gal, and then it was the Victorian gentleman.
We're channeling whatever today. Chelsea, it's kind of a tough question, but I know you have a gracious heart, which is one of the reasons that you talk so openly in your podcast about what happened with your father, and certainly sharing with a community of people who are either affected by addiction or directly affected, such as you and your family. But your father died, as you mentioned, on December 23rd, 2020, and just 2 days before Christmas. And with the third anniversary of his passing approaching, and given the holidays can be really tough for some folks anyway, is there a particular faith or skill set that you've learned? Because you touched a moment ago that you didn't have a skill set. But is there anything that you've learned or advice that you can share that might help other folks going through something similar?
I don't know why that's such a tough question for me to answer. Not that it's tough. You know what it is? It needs to be individualized. That's my best advice. It needs to be bespoke, because grief is not one size fits all, and nor is addiction. So your experience is going to be completely your own, and the way that you react to it and get through it is all of your own as well. I am a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. My sanctuary is the woods. Anytime I'm on a trail and I'm among the trees and I'm absorbing the peace and the quiet or the bird song or whatever it is, if I'm outside and I'm in nature, I'm good. If I can come home and know that there are people there who will welcome me and who love me at the end of the day, I'm good. If I have friends, when the mood strikes me, that I can call and just say, listen, I'm having a really hard grief day. Like, can we just chat for a minute? Or can I just tell you a memory or something that I had? I'm more of a verbal griever, I think. I'm always scared to death that my dad's memory will fade. I love talking about him. I love bringing up memories. He and my husband were very close, and I'm so grateful that they had that relationship, because it makes it so much easier for me to talk to somebody about him, and someone who knew him well. I mean, my husband would go up when I was mad at my dad and I was refusing to see him. My husband would go up without me even knowing and hang out with him.
Really?
And I'm just so grateful.
Yeah, there's got to be some comfort in that he stood, as the term is, stood in the gap for you when you were unable to do that. He showed up for you.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that my dad had that, so that's what I mean. Your experience is going to be your own. However, I will say, education on all aspects of this experience is particularly important. So if you are grieving and you're not really familiar with how to do it, what's the process? If you're still in the stage where you're asking, well, how long is this going to last? When is it going to be over? I'm done with this.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that.
Question. Do your research. Start Googling. As stupid as it sounds, Google, how long does grief last? And the answers that you find will lead you down a really interesting rabbit hole. And I'm not being sarcastic or facetious. Those are the things that helped me find some of the podcasts that helped me the most in the beginning, like Terrible Things for Asking, like The Grief Coach, and so many other platforms and outlets that I came across. You'll start reading books. For me, having the podcasting platform was so valuable because I was able to meet with people who had written books about their heroin addiction, knowing what they went through in active addiction and seeing the people that they came out on the other side to be floored me. I couldn't believe that this was possible. So they say ignorance is bliss, but I don't think that's true. I think education really, really sheds light on the path that you need to follow to find where you need to be.
I would agree with that as well. I mean, some things we're protected by ignorance, and other things, most things, it behooves us to find the answers to help ourselves or other people. So I understand that just this past month, you met your co-host Suzanne Michelle in person for the first time.
I don't know why it took us so long. We're
For
like
the
an hour
first
away.
time. I'm curious how you both came together in the first place to talk about such a sensitive yet incredibly important issue facing our nation. I do believe a lot of times in divine providence that a message gets out when people need it. And your message and your story is serving, obviously, by what you just shared and the people you've connected with, is serving a lot of people in their need and what they need to hear to give them some tools and information and education to help them in what they're dealing with. So yeah, how did you and Suzanne come together in the first place?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
why did it take you so long to meet us?
I don't know what's wrong with us. We have issues. Suzanne would love everything that you just said. She's such a believer in divine intervention and things, happening when they need to. I met Suzanne in 2021 and she was a guest on the Sticky Eddie podcast while I was searching. Yeah, she was originally a guest in my first season. I had been doing research and trying to find people with similar stories and experiences. And she, at the time, had a Instagram page called Grieve-Grow, based on a poem about, I believe it's grief growing within the dashes. So, for example, when you see the date on someone's headstone and there are dashes in between the numerals, that's where the grief grows. I'm butchering it, but something to that effect. There was a beautiful poem that really stuck with her and that inspired her to start her account. She hosted a blog through a link tree that was available on the account. And so I just started reading what she was writing. Unfortunately, she lost her husband also in September of 2020. He passed away suddenly. And
was
sadly,
it from addiction as well?
No, they are both in recovery. Well, when Bobby was alive, Suzanne and Bobby, her late husband, were both in recovery. They were both not alcoholics, not imbibing, doing very, very well. Bobby had a heart condition. And unfortunately, it took him very suddenly the day after his 50th birthday.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Suzanne was the one who came home and found him.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So it was, talk about traumatic. I can't ever imagine.
No, nor would I want to.
So that's how we initially met. I invited her to be a guest on my show. And from the second we started talking to each other, it was just like, literally.
Could you do that again? It was like, what?
Sorry,
I always break out in song. So I love that. Okay, folks listening, I'm not the only one known to break out.
Constantly. I hate musicals, but for some reason my life is a musical. It's very strange.
Do you really? Okay, wait a minute.
I do. I hate them.
Wait. Hate's a strong word, sister.
No, I hate them.
Why? But wait, why hate?
Can't stand, aside from maybe The Lion King, I can't stand a show where it's like we're singing, I'm walking across the room and I'm picking up my cup of coffee.
Musicals? Are you kidding? I would love to. And actually it happened once in my life. I'm totally digressing. I have always wanted to be in a scenario where people just broke out in song from a cue, like a word. It happened once in my life at a coffee shop in Southern California where
that must have been cool though.
On the radio, and I'm totally dating myself, I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family
was
a good
playing
song. And everybody in the coffee, there was only like 8 of us, just when the chorus came on, we all sang it out loud. And I'm like,
oh, but that's
yes,
fun.
yes.
That I could do because it's
Okay.
real life and it's just spontaneous.
Okay.
I feel like these people really put in all of their effort and spent hours in a makeup chair to come on here and like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I've been canceled by Broadway, but
Yeah. And you live exactly. No wonder you live outside of Manhattan.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So carry on, my dear. I guess we can still be friends. I'll forgive you. You're not perfect.
Okay, thanks. I like
Okay.
music. I love spontaneous musical moments, but in life,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, I'm not doing any better. So we just connected. We connected really strong and really well right off the bat. And as I kept doing Sticky Eddie by myself, I was really trying to make it really get off the ground. I really wanted it to be something huge. And the longer I did it, the more I realized it's such an intense experience to try and gather sponsors, to try and gather guests, to record, to edit, all of the things. I mean,
yes.
people think, I've heard you mention this on your show. Sometimes I think people have a misconception that it's like, oh, you just hit record and you post and then we're done.
Some people
but-
actually, in all fairness, and I mean this in all fairness, that's what some people do.
I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I do it, but I still have to edit and I still have to,
promote and
do
artwork
certain things. Yeah. So there are other layers. So the farther I got along, I realized that I was still too fresh in grief and it was just too overwhelming and I just couldn't do it alone. So I knew that Suzanne was batting around the idea of also starting her own podcast, but she, for whatever reason, is super shy at times. And I was like, well,
I wouldn't get that from listening.
No, you wouldn't.
Not at all.
She was just nervous about, I guess, doing it on her own. And I said, okay, well, why don't you come and just co-host Sticky Eddie with me? And that way we get to do it together and you can get more and more used to being on the mic and we'll interview people together and it'll be great. So we did that for really, quite a few months together and we had a blast. In August of 2022, I suffered a huge breakdown. And I was actually diagnosed with premenstrual depressive disorder, which aligns with a woman's cycle. And unfortunately, because of the amount of hormones and different sort of bodily fluctuations that are involved with that, it causes a huge shift in mood. My depression was at an all-time high. It was very scary. It was not like anything I'd ever dealt with before, even in my deepest, darkest days of grief. It was horrific. I didn't know what was happening. Sorry. Thank you. I mean, if you aren't familiar, again, it's worth giving it a Google, but I know some people are suffering around those same times and not really understanding why. So I finally was able to get to my doctor and secure the correct medication and, continued with talk therapy and I did all the things. But at the time, I couldn't do Sticky Eddie anymore. I had the biggest pod fade. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And Suzanne, of course, was so understanding and so gracious. And I just said, listen, talking about addiction day in and day out and doing all of this, and it's just not helping my mental health right now. And I'm in a scary place. Like I need a break.
Well, good on you that you recognize that.
Thank you. I mean, I have a son and a husband to live for. I have to do right by them. And so we took a few months and we still spoke. And of course we kept in touch because we're friends, but I missed her. I missed getting on Zoom and seeing her face and talking to her every week. And so we started Zooming with each other, like not recording anything, just checking in with each other and talking so that we could be face to face. And one day she was like, you realize if we were recording this the whole time, it would have made a great episode. And I'm like, and we kept saying that to each other. And I'm like, you know what? It would. And she's like, why don't we just do a show where there's no pressure, where even if it sounds crappy or even if it's just la 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 the whole hour, we get whatever's on our mind out. And we get to talk to each other. And if people listen, great. And if not, we did something fun and there's no pressure. And so that is why we dubbed it, let's try this again. Let's round 2. And it's random chats about the chaos of life. And we touch on everything. We do try to be somewhat structured. And then a couple of weeks ago, it was just such a gorgeous day. And because this summer has been so surreal, I hadn't been able to get my son to the beach. And it was such a beautiful day. I said, you know what, why don't we go and visit Sue? And we did. We drove out to Long Island. We set up a date, and Mason and I drove out there with my mini poodle, Gigi. And we spent the day at the beach, and it was amazing. And what's so fun was that it wasn't weird. It was almost like we see each other in person every day. That's how comfortable it is with her.
It's such a testament to the power of podcasting. I know it sounds corny, folks. I know it's like, okay, Cheryl, you have a podcast, you love it. But really, the people that you get to connect with. And I saw the pictures on Instagram, and it looked delightful, and the beach looked wonderful, and you looked very happy. And to have someone that you can relate to like that is gold, especially when it sounds like you found each other to help each other heal and walk through this process together. And I really think the name of your podcast, Random Chats About the Chaos of Life, is perfect.
Thank you.
Because life is chaotic right now, and we do need to talk to other people about it. And last year, you guested on the YouTube podcast, From the Depths of Darkness to the Light of Success. Love that, because again, it's kind of like, reminds me of, From Fear to Hope, from the depths of darkness to the light of success, where you shared that your mother is in the early stages of dementia, and that you encourage folks to get to know their loved ones, write some questions down that you've always wanted to ask them to preserve their story. So first of all, how is your mom doing, and have you been able to capture some of her stories?
Well, she and I have a complicated relationship. Thank you for asking. She is physically doing okay. She still lives in the house that I grew up in. Funnily enough, my parents lived around the corner from each other in the last years of my dad's life. And they were very much best friends. They were in each other's lives until the end.
That's amazing.
It made it much easier after they finally split up. My mom and I have a complicated relationship. She's always kept me at an arm's length throughout my life. And so losing my dad really just pushed her over the edge as far as like into dementia.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, it's a fact of life. My mother was 41 when she had me. Also, too, I just have to say, my mom was such a smoke show back in the day. Talk about a gorgeous lady.
Smoke show?
She's
never
beautiful.
Heard that term before.
She'll always
What
be beautiful.
Smoke
She's
show.
She really, really was.
Well, you're a smoke show, my dear. So you have not fallen far from the tree. I've never heard that term. That's my new favorite term.
So she had me when she was 41, which I guess I hate the term, but they call it a geriatric pregnancy.
God.
I know, I hate it. I hate it so
came
much.
Up with that one?
A man.
Goodness, of course. A geriatric. Obviously, they've never read the Bible where Sarah was, 90 something.
God, really?
Yeah.
Sheesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not going to happen in my world.
No thanks. I like to sleep. Okay.
There's no room in the womb.
I like that. Oh my God. I can't.
As opposed to there's no room at the inn.
There's no room
in the womb.
Move on. There's no room in this womb.
Oh my gosh. I don't know how much I'm going to keep in, but anyway.
But I think that lends itself to sometimes complications later in life. So when I was in my mid-20s, she had breast cancer. Thankfully, it was in the very early stages, and she was able to have a lumpectomy, and she was in remission and fine.
Wonderful.
So there were just a couple of things that came, I think, out of her body going through what it went through at certain stages in her life. But she loved my dad, and we weren't expecting this. It was quite a shock. And it just kind of, I think the trauma of it all just sent her to a different place. So it's difficult. In the beginning, I definitely tried to make an effort to get more out of her, just getting to know her a little bit. And unfortunately, over the past year or so, it's come to a point where I've decided that it's better for me to be a caretaker from a distance, if you will.
Yeah, I get it.
It's a self-preservation thing at this time. And it just keeps me at my best mentally and emotionally, and able to give my husband and my son what they need and keep me in good spirits, as opposed to being re-traumatized, which unfortunately can happen when you spend time with a family member you don't quite jive with all the time. We'll put it that way. But she was a great mom growing up. I mean, again, I was very close with my dad, but my mom was always there. I mean, she definitely would have laid down her coat over a puddle for me. So
I hope I didn't touch on too sensitive.
Oh, not at all.
I just loved that you were encouraging people to get the stories, spend,
You should.
if you can. You mentioned staying at a safe arm's length, and I completely relate to that and understand it because sometimes you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay. Like I
Yeah,
fully
sure.
I want everybody, I had so many of my dad's stories and I had so many memories of other family members who I cherished before they passed. I love spending time with my dad's side of the family now. We've gotten much closer over the past almost 3 years. And I just really love hearing about the history of that side. I wish that it were possible for me to know more about my mom's lineage and who she was as a person before I even existed. So if you are able to get that information, oh my God, do yourself the favor, record, and write. Do a podcast with just your grandma and just have her tell
Yes.
stories. Oh my
Yeah.
God, how cool would that be? I would love to do that. Hear about the war and like
Yes.
why rubber was such a big deal.
A lot of these people are not asked. And believe it or not, coming to the hour of our time together, and, Chelsea, in listening to your story, it is amazing, if not
Oh,
miraculous, that you have
thank
such a
you.
passion for sharing your story through your podcasts and the advocacy work you do. And even through the original sponsor of the Sticky Eddie podcast, Brainwash Coffee,
Yes.
as they give 50% of their proceeds supporting addiction recovery. And I'd love to know, and no affiliate relationship with them, by the way, but I wanted to give them a plug because I just love the
Yeah.
fact that they would do that. I'd love to know what makes you hopeful.
Coffee.
Alrighty then, moving along.
No. Um, Honestly, and it's funny that you asked because last night I was getting ready for bed and I got, I mentioned this to you prior to this conversation, but I was in an accident over the summer that injured me pretty badly. And I was recently given the okay to do a little bit more physical activity that made me so excited because it's just been such a long time.
Beautiful.
And last night before I went to bed, I kept thinking how excited I was to wake up this morning and be able to, do this part of my past routine and how good it would feel. And then I would come inside and I would have, my favorite peanut butter granola for breakfast and a really, really good cup of coffee. And I'd be able to, watch the sun come up. That's what makes me hopeful. The small things that you can look forward to at the start of every day. It doesn't necessarily have to be a workout routine or, anything like that, but whatever makes you passionate to meet the next sunrise and just knowing that I think the world is getting better. People seem to be connecting a little bit more and people seem to have more empathy. And that makes me hopeful. The fact that I can still get up in the morning and watch the sunrise, and there are those moments of peace where everything is just as it should be. And that's how I carry forward.
I gotta say how incredible it is that you can have that take on where life is right now, because I know there's probably every newscaster out there would beg to differ. And certainly a lot of people in our own communities would argue the reasons why that's not the case. But especially with everything you've been through, again, you turn the phrase, you turn your outlook. You're obviously holding on to hope. And thank you for sharing that, because that's a really, it's corny to say positive. It's beyond positive. That is a divine turn of your experience. So I've read that you love horror movies.
I love horror food too. I know
Horror
you
food,
never
yeah.
can tell.
Okay. For all the horror food cookers, chefs out there, horror movies, vintage cars, blues and punk rock. And now I know from this episode how much you love musicals.
Hate them.
So, with that in mind, Chelsea, if there was a soundtrack to your life, what would be on it and why?
Oh. Stevie Ray Vaughan would open it up.
Ooh.
Otis Redding would even it out. And Stevie Ray Vaughan would open it up. Otis Redding would be there next. James Brown would really get our blood pumping.
James Brown?
Yes. And then Ray Charles would quiet us down. If I was stuck with artists for like, a month, I could be okay being stuck with those 4.
Those would be your desert island discs.
I think so, yeah, because Stevie Ray could be a little punk sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Saw him live at the Hollywood Bowl. I think I shared that with somebody else.
It was me.
Was it you? Oh,
yes,
yeah.
When I interviewed you. And I was so jealous.
Gosh.
I could feel like the taste of jealousy in my mouth.
Okay.
That's how much I love him.
That's all right. It's all right. I have some years. You can be jealous of my wise experience and eclectic.
Oh my God, what an experience.
Whatever. Hey, Miss Chelsea, how can folks get a hold of you?
You can find our podcast Instagram, Let's Try This Again Pod. There are underscores in between each word for fun. I like to confuse people. I am on LinkedIn and I am also on Instagram at Chelsea Runs Around. I will have a website eventually, but that's coming soon. So it's neither here nor there right now. I don't know why I brought it up.
Well, because it's something for folks to look forward to. I'll have that in the show notes so that when people want to...
Well, in the future, it will be chelseaelizabethwrites.com.
As in WRITES.
Correct. I'm spelling things the right way this time.
No pun intended. Oh, my dear. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this time. This has been a delight for me. And
so when are we going to start recording?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Did I turn it on?
Double check.
Criminy.
Darn.
I already did. I already recorded it.
Cheryl, what an honor. I just have to say, I'm so in awe of you and everything that you've accomplished. Just your whole show is so well produced and well put together. And I'm just really grateful that our paths crossed and that Miss Kathy Barron put you in my life, because if there's anyone that I can learn from, it is definitely you. And I'm just so honored that you asked me to do this. So thank you so much for having me.
I, for once, am speechless, my dear. And all I will say is, besides another shout out to Miss Kathy Barron, you're welcome and thank you. So, so, so glad that our paths have crossed and that you are now in my life.
Yeah.
Love of musicals or not.
I'm sorry.
I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips in so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic. BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the Group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com. Visit my website at soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at Cheryl Halling VO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories from Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.